Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time to see what's making the headlines with the broadcaster and commentator, Ali Miraj, and the chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Sodha. Welcome to both of you, with us from now until just before midnight. So to the front pages, as ever, let's start with that. And we kick off with The Sun and an exclusive story revealing that one of the United Kingdom's nuclear subs carried out a failed Trident missile test launch while the Defence Secretary was on board. The Daily Mail goes with Prince William's comments that too many people have died in Gaza and calling for an end to the conflict. This is The Times. Prince issues Gaza plea for a permanent peace. And it's also the lead story for The Telegraph. Meanwhile, The Guardian says the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer is facing more dissent within his own party over his policy on Gaza, despite his calls for a ceasefire. The Express has the latest remarks from Rishi Sunak about illegal migrants and how he feels they're jumping the queue to come here. The Metro leading with claims that the government knew as far back as 2016 that a secret investigation by the Post Office into problems with the Horizon computer system had been dropped, even though it could have prevented the wrongful conviction of sub-postmasters for fraud and theft. Financial Times reporting that Barclays shareholders are to have £10 billion returned to them as part of a plan to boost revenue and move away from investment banking. Well, The Star tells us about a huge black hole in space which is apparently eating large amounts of the universe. I'm not sure large amounts of the universe is exactly accurate, but that story was around yesterday. They're a bit late today. Anyway, don't forget, scan the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme. You can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to Ali and to Sonia. Lots of elements about the prospects of a ceasefire for Gaza, lots of pushes and pulls from different areas. So let's kick off with the international element of this, shall we? What happened at the UN and what the United States is now going to do about it, Sonia?
Yes, so the US is circulating a draft UN Security Council resolution which essentially would warn Israel against launching a major ground offensive in Rafah, which is the part of the Gaza Strip where there are 1.5 million Palestinians sheltering. Many of them have moved from other parts of the Strip. And this is really significant because we know that for a while now, behind the scenes, Biden and American diplomats have been putting pressure on Israel to exercise restraint, given the dreadful humanitarian toll that we're seeing in the Gaza Strip. But this would be a very public act, obviously, a UN Security Council resolution, and it would be sort of the strongest signal that the US has sent Israel yet, that it should not go ahead in Rafah and that it needs to be exercising more restraint than it's been showing. So I think it's actually a really, really significant moment. And then what's going on internationally, which I'm sure we're going to come on to speak to, there is a shifting position within the UK of political parties as well, which reflects, I think, the fact that the US is changing its position. We have this thing in the UK where quite often both the opposition and the government will kind of take its lead from America.
Yeah. Well, just on America very quickly before we move on to what's going to happen in Parliament as well, is, how significant is this shift by the States? If it is ignored by Netanyahu and Biden grows stronger in his calls for a cessation in hostilities, even if temporary, what does that say about the relationship? And will there be calls, do you think, for America to simply pull the weaponry that it's sending to Israel to carry out any future offensive in Rafah?
Well, there might be. Look, it's an election year. Joe Biden wants this calmed down as quickly as possible. There has been a tremendous loss of life. Obviously, 1,200 Israeli citizens killed on October the 7th and 29,000, according to the Gaza-run health ministry, and thousands more completely displaced. I mean, the UN numbers are absolutely horrendous. Now, Sonia is right to point out that 1.5 million people are in Rafah. They've got nowhere to go. That is the problem here. Now, at the moment, the US at the UN today has vetoed another ceasefire call from 22 Arab states that put forward a ceasefire motion on the basis that simply calling for a ceasefire will not deal with the hostages issue. And we also know that there are these back-channel negotiations, as we understand, with Qatar involved, which are really working around a three-stage process. One is to get the guns falling silent, the hostages to be released, aid in, but more importantly, a grand bargain for all of this, which will be Saudi recognition of Israel, and then longer down the track, a two-state solution, which seems to be like a fig leaf on the horizon at the moment. But this will come to a head. If Biden puts pressure on Israel and Netanyahu ignores it, what does Biden then do? Does he withdraw the actual weaponry that is being provided to Israel? If that happened, that would be a huge moment. Simply saying to Israel to stop, I'm not sure. I think Netanyahu could call his bluff.
Yeah.
I think Ali makes a really important point there, which is that there's this sort of public diplomacy, which we're all seeing, and then there is the stuff going on behind the scenes. And, you know, the Gulf states are really, really key in that because, yes, countries can call for a ceasefire and they can publicly call for a ceasefire, but you've got to have a roadmap to get there. And the starting point for a ceasefire has got to be both sides laying down arms, Hamas releasing all the hostages, and then somehow you've got to sort of try and build trust towards something that might look like a lasting peace between these two sides. So it's very much, yes, we're hearing about all the public stuff, but there is another process going on as well, which is actually, I think, in some ways, more important.
Yeah, I'm going to come on to Prince William in a moment, but first of all to The Guardian, because you alluded to what we're expecting in Parliament and what Labour does about it, because obviously we've had resignations, including people like Jess Phillips, you know, well-known. Labour does not want to see any more. But will there be pressure again, do you think, on the Labour leader, facing another threat of revolt, as The Guardian says, over this vote that we're expecting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it very much... It's one of those things where it's really weird because it's this huge international issue, but I think it's going to come down to parliamentary process. So just to explain, there's an opposition day debate, which is what opposition parties can have. It's up to them what they set the topic. The SNP have made it about the need for a ceasefire and have put in, you know, quite a blunt motion, like they did before, saying we need a ceasefire immediately. Now, Labour have tabled its own amendment to that motion, which is actually much longer and talks about, you know, Labour for the first time is saying they want an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, but it is putting a lot more flesh on the bones around, well, what needs to happen, including being very clear that Hamas has to release all the hostages and Israel needs to be confident Hamas isn't going to launch another terrorist attack. Then you've got the government that's put its own amendment to this motion, which is probably, you know, Labour's somewhere in the middle of the three motions. So the tricky thing for Starmer will be, so the Speaker can either select the Labour amendment to the SNP motion, in which case Starmer's probably home and dry, because I don't think there'll be a rebellion in that case. I think Labour backbenchers, including those who rebelled last time, will vote for the Labour motion. Slightly more complicated is if the Speaker selects a government amendment and it's a government amendment that goes through, and then what happens? Do Labour MPs vote for or against it? But I think a lot of people at home will be sitting there thinking, why are we talking about parliamentary procedure when, you know, this is a huge international crisis?
And people are watching it on their phones, the pictures from Gaza.
And obviously it matters what the UK says, but, you know, the SNP want a motion that just says, you know, ceasefire now. Labour are quite rightly pointing out, well, there's no point just calling for it. We may be in government. We need a roadmap for how to get there. And, you know,
Isn't it also, Sonia, about the fact that Starmer is trying to balance, on the one hand, charges of anti-Semitism, and he's really tried to detoxify his party since the Corbyn era. Now, admittedly, in the last week, he's had a very tough time. He had to suspend one Labour MP and also basically withdraw support from another in a by-election, which is highly embarrassing for the party because it's going to have no candidate effectively on the ballot paper, although they will appear as the Labour candidate, but they won't have any support, this Azhar Ali thing. And on the other hand, he's got a lot of people thinking that he's been completely weak on this ceasefire issue. So if parliamentary procedure tomorrow shows that the Speaker of the House does not call on the Labour amendment, then what does Labour do? Does it back the SNP call for a ceasefire? Because I tell you, the pressure on Starmer is becoming unbearable within elements of his own party. Now, he may make a calculation that, there are 2 million Muslim votes in this country, maybe most of them may be voting for Labour. Can he afford to let them go? Maybe he makes that calculation that it doesn't matter that much. But I can tell you, about 50 people 50 people went against the motion last time in November when the SNP brought it, including 8 front bench resignations. It's a very difficult situation for him.
So, and into this melee, into this difficult and very, very sensitive issue, comes the heir to the throne, Prince William.
Yes. So he's doing a couple of visits to the Middle East. He's just done one, and he's released a statement which is, I think, very unusual. It's fair to say, particularly because it's not the monarch; it's the heir to the throne. The one thing I will say, though, is that I think the statement, I mean, there's not a lot of meat to it in a sense. He's not calling for some. He's not sort of. It's hard to see a statement as a political intervention in the sense that, you know, it expresses massive regret for what's gone on, for, you know, the awful atrocities that happened on October the 7th, for the innocent people who've lost their lives in Gaza, and says that this needs to come to an end as soon as possible. He doesn't use the word ceasefire. I'm sure not many people would disagree with the hope that it would come to an end as soon as possible. And it's not really out of line with the government's position. I think if the heir to the throne had come out and said you could see sort of clear blue water between where the government is, where the Foreign Secretary is, and where the heir to the throne is, that would be a lot more controversial. But this feels like quite a high-level general statement.
I think that...
You take a different view?
I'm slightly concerned about it because, look, I understand exactly, I empathise with exactly where Prince William's coming from. He clearly cares deeply about this issue, as I'm sure his father does. These people are very balanced, measured individuals. They care deeply about the rise in anti-Semitism in the country, the attacks that took place on October the 7th, and also the loss of life on the Gazan side. So I understand that. But the problem is, this is a highly emotive, very charged issue with very strong opinions globally and also in this country. Now, if you're the heir to the throne, you have to tread very, very carefully on this. Now, you get a little bit more leeway as Prince of Wales than you do as monarch, but not that much. So it's very, very delicate. Downing Street does not clearly want a rift with Prince William, so they're saying he hasn't really gone against the government line. But the government hasn't really been talking that much about the fact that too many have died in Gaza at all, really. What it's been basically saying is, well, what has it been saying? I mean, it's effectively backing the Israeli position. That's its prerogative. It's still providing arms to Israel. So I do think there's a little bit of a departure there, but clearly they don't want to row. I would just tread very carefully if I was the heir to the throne. I think it's very, very fraught. And the late Queen, may she rest in peace, was always very assiduous about these things. You've got to be seen to be above the fray. And it's hard. It is difficult.
Going to see if I can squeeze two quick stories in, if you don't mind. The Sun, trying to squeeze as many shortened words into a headline as ever, I think. Brit nuke sub launch fails. This is while the Defence Secretary was on board, we are told.
Yes, that's right. So it was a test of a Trident missile on the 30th of January. The missile was launched and it failed, and it sort of came down, not, within sort of, close to the launch, I suppose, so everyone could see it. Apparently, it's the second one that's failed in a row. We don't have a huge amount of detail from the story.
Well, the MOD has given us a statement on the back of this.
Right.
They have said HMS Vanguard, the vessel which we're talking about, and her crew have been proven fully capable of operating the UK's continuous at-sea deterrent, passing all tests during a recent demonstration and shakedown operation, a routine test to confirm that the submarine can return to service following deep maintenance work. During the test, an anomaly occurred. As a matter of national security, we cannot provide further information on this. However, we are confident that the anomaly was event-specific, and therefore there are no implications for the reliability of the wider Trident missile system and stock.
Well, that's all right then, isn't it?
Yep.
So basically, if we're being led to believe, which is the current narrative coming out from Western leaders, that Putin's going to attack a NATO state within the next 6 years, as long as there's an event-led specific issue, we shouldn't worry about it.
I mean,
we can't even get HMS the Prince of Wales to leave the port to go into a NATO exercise. We've got a nuke. I mean, what is this, Dad's Army? I mean, we've got a situation here where the Army's recruitment levels are at 75,000 at the moment, and yet at the Munich Security Conference at the weekend, everyone's talking tough on Putin. And the reality is this: J.D. Vance, a Republican senator, made the statement very clearly. They talk tough, the West. They're not going to do anything. Ukraine is spending more munitions in 1 month than the West produces in a year. It's not just about money. It's about munitions and putting your thing on a munitions footing.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the Press Preview. With me once again, the broadcaster and commentator Ali Mirage and the chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Soda. Well, a story close to Sky News' heart, let's be honest about it, which is the price of baby formula. A probe has been launched because people are really suffering with how they buy the food to feed their children.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a Competition and Markets Authority that has launched an inquiry into this, an investigation. And the reason is that baby formula prices have gone up by 25% in just 2 years. And I didn't realise, actually, how much market domination there was. So it's just two companies, Nestle and Danone, which account for 85% of sales. And you can imagine, I mean, having a baby is such an expensive time anyway. Some women don't want to breastfeed. Some women just can't breastfeed. They are reliant on formula milk. And it's, you know, it's expensive. And 25% in 2 years when there's a cost of living crisis, it's huge. And so what the CMA will be looking at is this purely driven by the cost of the raw ingredients and the labour and the cost of production and shipping, etc., or, you know, this level of market domination by two big players? Is there something else going on that's more akin to sort of price fixing?
Let's move on to the front page of the Times, shall we? It leads on Prince William and his Gaza plea, but also on the side here is the speculation over how Alexei Navalny died. And this is interesting, isn't it?
It is, and it's brutal. What the speculation is that obviously he was in an Arctic penal colony. Yeah. The temperature was minus 27 degrees. They put him outside for longer than an hour, made his blood go basically stone cold, and then there was a punch to the heart, a single punch to the heart, which is apparently what KGB operatives are taught to do, which is absolutely fatal in those conditions. So it doesn't bear thinking about. Thoughts with his family. His wife is very courageous, trying to be steadfast and resolute in what is a horrendous time. They won't even release the body yet because, well, they're saying it's all procedural. We don't know if it's with Novichok or whatever. Now we understand it's this punch to the heart. But absolutely appalling. He was a symbol of the resistance in Russia. Clearly, President Putin's an autocratic dictator with nothing to lose, completely quashes all sorts of dissent whatsoever. But as I say, the West talks a good game on taking Putin on. But frankly, if I was President Zelensky or anyone in Russia, I'd be worried about the West staying power. The West does not have the risk appetite for the long game. You can see that in Afghanistan. You can see it with Pakistan. You can see all of these things. People have been let down by the West. That's the problem.
You can see it with what's going on in the US at the moment with House Republicans, you know, using the aid package, you know, to play domestic politics with.
About the border, the southern border.
This is, you know, global security. Putin just isn't a threat to Ukraine or through, you know, to dissidents like Navalny. I mean, he's a threat to the West.
And front page of the Daily Telegraph now, also leading on Prince William and Gaza. But again, their right-hand column, Martha's Rule forces doctors to note the instincts of parents. And Martha's Rule allows worried parents to seek out a second opinion. Is that right?
Absolutely. So this is something that one of my colleagues at The Guardian has been campaigning for, Mary P. Mills. So it's incredibly tragic, lost her daughter, Martha, and she died of sepsis. And it was preventable, but the doctors missed it. So this gives parents and carers the right to request a second opinion when they see their child deteriorating. And that means a second team of doctors and nurses, specialists in sort of sepsis intensive care. And I think Merope and her husband Paul will think that they didn't want Martha to die in vain. They wanted to do something for other parents who might find themselves in the same situation.